everyone. This is my talk, what is Windows App SDK? It's a question you might know the answer to, hopefully not, that's why you're here. Has anyone actually heard of Windows App SDK? That's a good question to start with. Okay, that's good, more than I thought. But let's not talk about that for now. Let's go through a bit of a history of native Windows application development. Some of you might have used some of these technologies. Some of you might be using them right now. So, early devs. So if you were basically writing apps on Windows, you'd have been writing apps that use the native Windows APIs, basically. So you'd basically create an application that would compile down to machine code, and that would run natively on Windows itself. So that'd be a Windows 1, basically, in the early 80s. Wasn't quite old enough to be a developer then. By the late 80s, when I was old enough to actually be a developer, that's when Microsoft introduced Visual Basic. So that was basically known as a rapid application development tool, which basically meant you could write an application quickly. That was the theory. And again, that allowed you to make and create native applications on Windows as well. But you could use a drag and drop UI to create your applications quite nicely. The next technology, which you may have heard of, is MFC. That was introduced in the mid-1990s. That's Microsoft Foundation classes. And that was basically a C++ library that was a high-level abstraction of the Windows API. So you could basically build native applications on Windows that way with object-oriented language, C++. Then, starting to get a bit more up-to-date, early 2000s. Excuse me. Which is when .NET came out, basically. So .NET, you could basically create applications using Windows Forms, and that also had drag and drop as well. And you could even call into the native Windows APIs if you wanted to as well for a desktop application. As things progressed, effectively into the XAML era, so in the mid-2000s, Microsoft introduced something called WPF, or Windows Presentation Foundation, and that was added to the .NET framework, and that introduced this idea of a markup language called XAML, or Extensible Application Markup Language. So you could basically create the UI separate from the code. The actual original idea was you could basically get a designer or someone decent to create UI, and then as a developer, you could create the code behind it, you could come together, and you'd have a great looking app with great functionality. So that was the idea of XAML, to keep that separation. And with that, you could create UIs that you just couldn't do with Windows Forms. But Windows Forms isn't actually an old technology anymore. You can actually use Windows Forms and WPF in the latest .NET. So they may seem to be legacy desktop technologies, but you could actually create a Windows Forms or a WPF project today and use the latest .NET if you wanted to. But to update stuff, Microsoft decided to add a new way of accessing APIs. So in the mid-2010s, they basically added something called WinRT. That was designed to be a modern replacement for the Windows APIs. These were all brand new APIs that you could call from your applications. And it was actually like almost like a language agnostic way. They had some ideas to basically support other languages. You could actually do it in Python and Ruby and Visual Basic and C++ and C# and all that kind of stuff. They just basically went, even JavaScript, they even had this idea of JavaScript native applications, which doesn't really exist anymore. The next big thing from Microsoft was Universal Windows Platform. This was the big one. Because before, all of these technologies were for Windows. WinRT, you could write apps for Windows Phone, the latest Windows Phone 8. You could write an app that ran on Windows 8 and on the mobile as well, using the same APIs. Not the full API experience, of course, for the phone, because you can't do printing and stuff like that from a phone. But UWP was the dream one, effectively. That could support desktop, laptop, tablet, phone, HoloLens, Xbox, every single Microsoft platform there was. Even IoT, you could run a UWP app on a Raspberry Pi. I know, because I tried it. And that was great. And it actually also had this idea of separating out the UI elements as well. So this basically introduced something called so WinRT introduced something called WinUI, and UWP introduced WinUI 2, and that was basically a set of controls that could be shipped outside of the normal release cadence. So you could have new controls that maybe had only just been introduced to Windows and hadn't been fully updated to it yet, or you could use the new controls in older versions of Windows. So Windows 10, say the first version, for example, you could have an application that could take advantage of the controls that were shipped later. So it gave you a lot of flexibility. It's kind of changed now, I'm afraid. So Windows App SDK, that is the result of taking everything that was great about UWP and native Windows development and sticking it all together. So you could create a native application that would be using a single set of APIs. So basically all applications that use the Windows App SDK all get the same API coverage. And you could target Windows 10 from a specific version, I'll talk about that in a second, and Windows 11 as well. And this used a newer version of WinUI, which again separates out the controls. The only negative thing about Windows App SDK is it's Windows desktop only. So there's no HoloLens, no Xbox, no phone, nothing. So you can only target Windows, but you might want to. So what actually is Windows App SDK? Let's answer that question. So that allows you to create native Windows apps from that specific version of Windows 10, 1809. So that's the version of Windows that was released in September 2018. They actually had version numbers that made sense back then. Right up to now. So whatever the current version of Windows 11 is, or the next version, that'll work. So that's the coverage you get. They're updated. It's updated pretty regularly. You don't have to wait for a Windows 11 update at all. The actual updates are every 6 months. So there's a new version of Windows App SDK released every 6 months with new features, and that's just from NuGet. So you can literally create an application, 6 months time, there'll be an update probably, update to the latest version from NuGet, and you can take advantage of any new features, controls, that sort of thing. As mentioned, it supports the Windows API and WinRT, so you get the best of both worlds. You can use all the cool new APIs and all the not so great old ones, but that's the benefit of being able to use both, because that was the main complaint. People were, when it was UWP, you couldn't use all the Windows APIs. You were limited to all the new stuff because they wanted an API set that was common to all of those platforms. But when they decided to bin all of that idea and just target Windows, we can give you all the APIs from Windows because you don't have to worry about it running anything else. So you get all the cool new APIs and the other ones as well. It's community driven. Microsoft will listen and add stuff eventually. So there's a particular control I've been asking for, Ink Canvas, that was in UWP for drawing. They're adding that in the next version of the Windows App SDK, finally, thank goodness. We'll be waiting a year and a half for them to do that. So they will listen. So there's something from UWP, if you happen to have been a UWP developer and Windows App SDK doesn't support it, go and tell them, go and mention it to them. They have community stand-ups, things like that, where you can basically go on and say, what would you like to have? I'd like to have this control, for example, and someone will hopefully eventually get around to adding that. But it's open source, so you can have a look. So you can check out this link, github.com/Microsoft/Windows App SDK. That's where you can see the roadmap, so you can see where it's going. So people can obviously request features. So if there is a missing control or missing API, you can ask for that and that will get added. Microsoft are always adding stuff to it, stuff they tend to use themselves. File Explorer's getting some new updates, like a contextual scroll bar. It's like a scroll bar with little sort of elements rendered in it. That will be something you can use. If you've got like an insider build of Windows 11 and you're running File Explorer, that is a window that's using some of the technology the Windows App SDK takes advantage of. Developers, of course, like ourselves, can add stuff to Windows App SDK. So I've got my own package that I've created. Basically adds a few useful controls. Useful, maybe a different word depending on what you think it's for. Playing cards, everyone loves playing cards. You need to put that in your apps, right? Please tell me the use case for putting that in a non-game, because I would love to know. But it was just, I thought it'd be a fun thing to do. Let's do a playing card. A dice, why not? Let's do a dice. Because these are just simple controls. Funnily enough, I was doing some things where I thought it might be fun to have reusable card controls, reusable dice. I thought, why not just share that with everyone? Piece, which is just a simple shape, just so you can do because I'll talk about it later, is I've got like a lot of tutorials in games and they use these components, or in fact I get you to build them again, because why not? And there's also a sector control as well. So there's these 4 and a couple of helpers, but I'm going to add some more controls in the new year. So these ones are fair enough, they're a bit limited in use case, but you'd be surprised what you can use them for. That sector control, I've used it to display charts. I've also used it to display a dartboard. So, it's whatever you really want to use it for. One of the things you can take advantage of with my package is you can display some assets. So I've got some asset packs that also work in other .NET technologies. So if you use Blazor, you can embed these as well, because they're just SVG. So anything that renders SVG, you can use these, so they're Blazor compatible. So I've got some flags. All the flags of the world are in there, in square and rectangle. We've got all the chess pieces, open source from Wikipedia. Also all the Mahjong tiles as well, because you never know when you might use them. Fluent emoji, so Microsoft have open sourced their fluent emoji that they use. If you've used Windows 11 or Teams, you've probably seen their emoji. They open sourced the whole lot, so I basically created a wrapper with a library of every single one in different styles. You've got flat, you've got shaded, which is 3D basically, so that's the more like the Teams style, and high contrast as well, so you can have high contrast ones. The latter ones, they also support color customization, so you can actually replace the colors. So if you want the smiley to have a green face or whatever, you can do that. So I don't do that for the flags, because I thought that might be a bit odd if you can change the colors of the flags. So you can't do that. But for all the others, you can change the colors if you want, so you can customize them and build. I've got a game, for example, which has got racing cars, and all the racing cars are different colors, and I just use the color replacement to do that. .NET can't not be here and not say the word .NET. So Windows App SDK takes advantage of .NET. Developers using the Windows App SDK can use everything that's in .NET. So the latest version of .NET is supported. I know there's documentation that says at the moment that Windows App SDK isn't compatible with .NET 8. It is. It's just the documentation hasn't been updated fully for the release version, but it does work, or at least will work if it needs an update. But the advantage Windows App SDK has over Universal Windows Platform, for example, is UWP use something called .NET Native. .NET Native is basically .NET Framework, so it's old and no longer being updated, so that's a bit of a reason to switch, because UWP and Windows App SDK are very similar. It's basically it's the natural migration path if you're modernizing UWP apps. This makes sense because it's got a lot of that same support. .NET generally has had better performance with every release as well, so if you do have existing Windows App SDK apps on older versions of .NET, you can up version to the latest version of .NET without any issues and get the gains of that performance. You can take advantage of the latest C# language features, so they're all available to you. So in .NET 8 you've got things like primary constructors and all that kind of stuff. That will all be fine, that will all work. Again, that's better than UWP, because UWP is stuck on C# 7.3. So you can use C# 12 in UWP, or 7.3 in UWP, or 12 in Windows App SDK. So you can see where the things are going. And you can also leverage other stuff that the latest .NET supports. You want to put some AI functionality, because that's obviously the thing everyone's doing these days. You can stick that in your Windows App SDK app as well, and use whatever technology you like that's currently supported by .NET. There's no real issue with that. If you happen to have not downloaded the latest version of .NET, which came out last week, you can get it from .NET. So, how do you get started? What's the first step? Well, you'll need Visual Studio for Windows, so it's Windows only. It will not work with Visual Studio Code. But you can use the Community Edition, which is free, so don't worry about that. I use it. When you're installing, you need to choose the .NET Desktop Development Workload. You'd think that would be it, but it's not. They have to tick a box. So yeah, there's basically, in the installation details, you have to sort of scroll down a bit and select that box. There is an open issue to change this. Someone has got a thing saying, please don't do this. So hopefully at some point, maybe when you get around to installing it yourself, this will be different and it will install it by default, because there's no real reason why you wouldn't install it. It's not like 10 gigs or something, it's only a few kilobytes. So hopefully Microsoft will make that a default option. It currently isn't, so you'll need to tick that box. Then you need to create a WinUI 3 in desktop project. That kind of sounds weird because that doesn't say Windows App SDK, but that's the one you need to select. If you want to get started, luckily someone has got some tutorials they wrote, that being me. So there's 50 of them at the moment, including a getting started one that talks you through every step you need to install it, and also how to set your environment up correctly as well. So basically I go from Hello World all the way up through some fun games, including the dartboard example I mentioned as well. And the games do take advantage of those packages, of course, but yeah, feel free to check out the tutorials there. So I mentioned this, so this is kind of a key part. What's WinUI, right? What is that? So that's the user interface platform that's part of Windows App SDK. So that provides the modern controls and what's known as the Fluent Design Language. So you've probably heard of Google's Material Design. Microsoft's is the Fluent Design Language. It used to be called the Modern Design Language, if you're familiar with that. But it's now Fluent Design because it's all cool and kind of has this kind of effect. WinUI 2 exists still, and that's still supported, weirdly. So you can get your controls through existing Universal Windows Platform applications, and that's still being updated. In fact, Microsoft yesterday posted on X saying, here's a cool thing you can do in UWP with WinUI 2. And it's like, you don't support UWP anymore, why are you tweeting that? So, obviously we've got WinUI 3, which I mentioned, that's for Windows App SDK. WinUI 3 is also leveraged by .NET MAUI. So if any of you are familiar with .NET MAUI, when you create the desktop target, that is what it's using. It's using WinUI. So it's effectively the same control surface, the same controls as Windows App SDK. And Uno Platform, weirdly enough. So Uno Platform also uses WinUI 3 as well for its desktop target as well. So if you happen to be developing for that platform, that is what you can use. It's also community driven. WinUI 3 has a bit of a broader community because it's not just used by the Windows App SDK, but .NET MAUI and Uno Platform. And yeah, it's also been open source fully, so you can actually get the latest releases of all the controls. So people, within like days of it being open source, people are porting the controls to Uno Platform natively, and also to WPF. So WPF's been getting some new controls for the first time, thanks to these controls being open source. Because WinUI 3 can't be used directly through WPF without using something called XAML Islands. Don't ask about that, it's way complicated. So people have been just taking the same control and porting it to WPF. So open source for the win. So WinUI 3, all the controls fully open source now, have been for the past week or so. Really good to see that. And you can download the releases from here. I'll have all the links at the end, don't worry. And you can get the full source code for all the controls. So if there's any you want to port over, feel free. So the kind of controls you've got buttons, checkboxes, combo box, radio buttons, sliders, toggle switch, the usual kind of controls you'd expect from an application. Collections, you can show things at grid, it's like a table basically. You got a flip view, just like a carousel. You got your grid view for grid layouts, items view for items, list boxes, you get the idea. And a tree view control, which was missing from UWP. So Windows App SDK has some nice control support. Layouts, you got your pixel perfect canvases, You've got relative panel, which is quite sorry, an expander, which is basically an expander control. I actually wrote an expander control, and then when I realized it was in basically in Windows App SDK, I thought I'll not bother because it already exists. So that was something that wasn't in UWP. We've got the relative panel, which is quite an interesting layout control. You can basically define relative relationships between items. Kind of interesting. There's a split view for you. Split view layout's kind of like what File Explorer uses, or probably does actually use. We've got a stack panel and a view box, so you can scale stuff. So you can basically have a tiny app, and then have it scale out nicely for different DPIs, like this display. Other controls, you've got calendar view, you've got a flyout. Interesting one is Web View 2. So this is the Edge browser engine, the Chromium engine. So you can embed a Web View 2 in your application and show modern web apps as well. So you can have a nice application there. Menu bar, so you've got menus, again in UWP. It was all touch oriented, so menus didn't really come into it. With Windows App SDK, they totally get that you want to write a desktop application now, so you need menus, so they are actually there. We've also got parallax view, which is an interesting one because its UWP predecessor I found a bug in and reported it to Microsoft and had to tell them they'd broken it and said, you've broken this control, you're going to have to fix it. It took a month to fix that. So I was like, that's how slow they are at fixing bugs. But they did fix it and they told me they fixed it. Luckily the one in Windows App SDK works perfectly for now. And then the last one is just a tab view. So again, you can have tabs, you know, like you have in Edge or whatever, so you can support that. So all of the controls that you can use are all in this WinUI gallery application. Annotated scroll bar, that was the one I was thinking of earlier. So you can see all these controls, and I'll show that in my quick demo. There's also this, the community is obviously pretty good at supporting projects. So this is the Windows Community Toolkit. This has all the extra controls and things that are quite useful. There's also, I actually used them in my demo as well for a couple of things. There was a nice enum converter to drop down. I was like, I need to have an enum showing a drop down. There's a helper in here that does that. So it saved me having to write that. It saved me a couple of hours of writing the code for the demo, so I was very happy with that. So the kind of things they got in the community toolkit, they got a radial gauge, might need to use that. Got a segmented control, which is like for settings. They've got settings cards, you know, like the settings in Windows 11, you can have the different settings displayed there. They've also got a wrap layout, so you basically have a layout that wraps around, which again isn't in Windows App SDK itself, but is supported by the community. There's also a uniform grid, which is quite a nice layout where all of the elements are spaced evenly. And dock panel, which I remember writing one of these. Again, I'll not bother now because there's already one there. So you can basically have some of the docks at the top, bottom, left, and right. So some really good community support. So basically, there's not a control in WinUI itself. There's probably a third-party one that you can use, and if there's not one of those, then you can write one yourself and share it with everyone. That's what I would probably recommend. Right. That's enough talking. Let's show it off. So we've got here's the, I'll show the other thing first actually. So this is the WinUI 3 gallery app. So this is actually an app you can just install, so you don't even have to install Visual Studio or anything. You can just install it from the store. You just look for WinUI 3 gallery. You can install it on any Windows 11 machine and it'll work. This is using the latest Windows App SDK 1.4, and you can see the different controls. You can see like the buttons, control buttons, you know what buttons are like, you know. We've got that, I'll show that, you can show a drop down button if you want. And there's lots of different things as well. We've got content dialog, so we can show a dialog. Let's see what that does. Yep, don't save. So all the kind of things you'd expect to build an application with. There's also some effects as well. There's some easings, you know, you can show some, so you can have nice smooth animations in your application. But yeah, all sorts of different things basically. The benefit of this is it actually shows you how to build them, so you can actually get the source code for either the XAML, so that's what you can see, or the C# source code, which is the code behind it. So if you want to know how all these things work, then you can. I've also got some tutorials on some of these, like the info bar. I've got a tutorial on how to use this one as well. But yeah, you can play around them. Don't need any dev knowledge at all. You just have a go at them and see what the controls actually do. For the community toolkit, same idea basically. You can see what the controls are like. Let's have a look at that radial gauge control. It's quite nice. I've tried to do one of these before. This one is much better than my attempt. So that's quite nice. You can just display a control and you can set all the different things as well. So you can change the width, the tick spacing, and the step size. So again, it gives you a chance to play around with these controls. And then once you're happy with them, you can then just install the relevant package and have a go at it in your application. Right, let's show some actual code. So I've got a simple example of my stuff. It's just a prototype. I was gonna try and do something just like those two things, but I'm a dev, not a designer, so I'm afraid it's a little bit more simple than that. But this is just a demo app showing my controls. So we'll do the assets one, for example, because that's the easiest one visually. So we've got some of our controls showing up. We've got our flags. We've also got like emojis, for example, so we can get adhesive bandage, which is a weird one I picked. You can also choose the different kinds as well. So those are all in separate packages. We can also choose different. So you want to write a chess game, and again, they'll support the color replacements. You want to have a chess set that's in blue or green or whatever. You can totally do that. And the same with the mahjong pieces. You can pick a different one, and again, those can be customized. We've got the our playing card one. If you want to see what the different playing cards are like. I don't actually have this enumeration in my package. That's my oversight there. When I was putting this demo together, I thought, that's a really cool idea. So there will be an update to this package where I'll have that available so you can use that, because it makes it a lot easier than a list of numbers. We've got our dice control, which again just shows the dice face, you know what a dice is like. This is the piece control. It also has a square piece as well, so you can have games. So if you see some of my tutorials, you'll see some of the games have square pieces. That's just that. It's just a square. But you can toggle between the two, which is kind of fun. And then we've got this sector piece, which I can change this, and then we can sort of see it. So I can go. So this is like a range selector control. This is one of the toolkit controls. So this is not the one that's built into Windows App SDK. This is one someone else written. This is the ultimate combination. I'm using the color picker, which is a standard Windows App SDK control. The range selector is a community control, and that is mine. So it's a good combination of all the different kinds of controls you can have. Any questions about that? Or do you want to see some of the code? See the code, yes. Cool. So apologies if it's not neat. So so here's the car page. So here's my control. So we just got namespaces. So if you're familiar with namespaces in .NET, same idea. So you've got a namespace. We've got the control. We've got the back color, which is just the accent color. We've got our combo box. Here's our helper. So this is in the community toolkit. So this allows me to bind to a list of enum values really easily. I'll show you that's just a normal enum. I've not done anything special with it. I got Bing to do this for me. So this is AI generated. So I said generate a list in enum form of every single playing card. So it did that. I didn't have to do that. That's the power of AI right there. Save me having to manually create that list. And it's correct, which I was impressed. It didn't hallucinate a card in there that doesn't belong, or there may be one. We've got this one as well. So this is the color picker. So this is the standard color picker, and you can customize all the different options. So, but this XAML flavor is not the same as Maui's. So if you're doing .NET Maui, you can't just copy and paste. Some of it might work, like buttons and simple controls. They'll probably be exactly the same, but unfortunately, Windows App SDK and Maui and WPF all use different XAMLs, just to be annoying. So it's sorry about that. Which does mean it's not possible to have controls that work in all three, unless they're all WinUI 3 based. So you can, as I said, when I mentioned earlier, you can host a WinUI 3 control with a XAML island in WPF. You can't do that in .NET Maui, I think, but if you could, then that would allow you to have a control. There was supposed to be something where you could do this. It was going to be called XAML Standard, but it didn't happen, unfortunately. .NET Standard happened, but XAML Standard didn't. So if you are doing Windows App SDK and you're wanting to create something based on a MAUI example, you will have to change your markup accordingly. But luckily for individual things like a text block, that's going to be the same. A button's going to be the same, so it shouldn't be. It's not going to be too difficult, but it's something you'll have to do. Okay. So, for Windows App SDK, if you're writing a native app, you want to target Windows 10, 1809 to the latest version of Windows, then you're all set. It's community driven, so there's something missing, please add it. It's fine. You know, it's not like the Microsoft of old where it's just tough. If it's not there, it's never going to get added. Microsoft will eventually add it, hopefully, like the ink canvas control. That's on the list, it's on the roadmap. And other controls are as well. And functionality as well. And those roadmaps are public as well. As I said, there's community stand-ups, so you can check those out when they're live. They're live on YouTube, so you can actually tune in, see the developers actually talk about what's in Windows App SDK, and give your comments and feedback. A lot of people do. You can leverage the latest .NET, so unlike older technologies, you can use the latest version of .NET. You've got WinUI 3 for those modern controls. I didn't mention it, but there's things like mica and acrylic, so those are the cool sort of effects that make applications look like they're semi-transparent. That's you can do in Windows App SDK. You can't do that in MAUI, you can't do that in WPF, not without a lot of effort. So when you can use all of those new effects and things like widgets as well. So widgets in Windows 11, there's support for that in Windows App SDK. There's only like 2 ways you can create and interact with widgets in Windows as a developer, and Windows App SDK is one of them. So if you're doing widget stuff, then that's probably a good one. And yeah, if you want to build a modern native Windows App SDK is the way to go, I think. And yeah, hopefully if you're wanting to do a Windows app, you will pick it. So thanks for listening. I've got a website where I've got my articles and a podcast. I've talked about Windows App SDK on my own podcast. I've also talked about it with Jamie Taylor on the Modern.NET show, so you want to tune in and hear me all talk about this again. I've got tutorials. As I said, I've got 50 on Windows App SDK. We'll have another 50 coming in the new year, which I'll be starting on soon. And that'll be some little apps as well. At the moment I've got all the games, so I did all the games first, get the fun ones out of the way. And I've got the little apps as well. One of them will hopefully be an ink canvas example, if I time that correctly. I will leave that one as late as possible, because it's going to be at least 4 or 5 months before that comes out, because the latest version just came out a month or so ago. And I've got some workshops as well that you can learn from, or you can check out my GitHub as well. Here's the links for everything I talked about. You can download the slides and the demo as well, so you can play around with the demo. And the 2 apps I showed are just on the store. So just search for WinUI 3 Gallery or Windows Community Toolkit, and you can install them. Don't need to be a dev. You can just play around with them on your work machine or whatever you like. That's it. Any questions? Or just a general chit chat if we've got time.
Thank you, Peter.
Oh yes.
Familiar with WPF, I was just wondering how SDK handles the separation of back-end and front-end. I know WPF's like data context and binding and stuff like
exactly
that.
the same.
Right.
So you've got data binding, and I was going to do my example with data binding and I have time, but yes, so it's exactly the same. So you can do the same kind of data binding. You've got 2-way binding, 1-way binding, so it's exactly the same. You can have a fully data-bound application with it all nicely XAML, bound to models, just like you can WPF. That's exactly the same. So yeah, that's supported just the same way, with this pretty much the same syntax as well.
Right.
Cool. Good question. Thank you.